There is a particular quality to the darkness just before a Roman dawn. It is not complete. It never quite is, even in the deepest part of the night. There are always small lights somewhere, a lamp set in a window niche, a torch burning low outside a tavern door, the glow of a brazier tended by someone who cannot sleep. But in this last hour before the sun begins to change the color of the eastern sky, the city of Rome is as close to quiet as it ever becomes. The streets have grown still. The stones of the road, which will grow warm and dusty by midday, hold the coolness of the night in them like water held in clay. This is the fourth watch of the night. The Romans divided their dark hours into 4 watches, and this final one runs from around 3 in the morning until the first light begins to soften the horizon. By Roman reckoning, the day has not yet started. The business of the city, the calling out of greetings in the forum, the clatter of the markets, the particular noise of 10,000 people going about their lives in close quarters, all of that is still folded away somewhere ahead, waiting. For now there is only this: the cool stone, the nearly empty lanes, the slow drift of wood smoke beginning to rise from the lower parts of the city. Rome in this year, the year that Romans know as the year of the consulship of Titus and Domitian, the year we would call 79 AD, is a city of somewhere around 1 million people, perhaps more. The exact number is impossible to know, but the city is vast and densely packed, a layered accumulation of centuries pressing close together on its hills and in its valleys. The Subura, which lies in the low ground between the Esquiline and Viminal hills, is one of the most densely inhabited districts of all. Its streets are narrow enough that the upper floors of the apartment buildings on either side nearly touch across the lane. During the day, it is loud and crowded and smells of everything a city of this density can smell of. But now, in the 4th watch, it is as quiet as it gets. The buildings here are called insulae. The word simply means islands, which is a way of describing how they sit, each block surrounded by the narrow channels of streets. They rise 4, 5, sometimes 6 stories high, built of brick and timber, and in the lower floors there are small shops and workshops that open directly onto the street through wide wooden shutters. These shutters are closed now. Most of the city is asleep behind them. The upper floors, where the poorest residents live in single rooms or shared spaces, are dark. The wealthier tenants on the lower floors have been still for hours, but not everyone sleeps. In a bakery near the lower end of the Subura, an oven has been burning for some time already. Bakers in ancient Rome typically began their work well before dawn. The dough needed time to prove, and the ovens needed time to reach their temperature, and the bread needed to be ready for sale when the city began to stir. The oven here is a domed structure of brick and clay, built into the wall of the bakery, and it has been heating since before midnight. A worker, probably a slave, has been tending it, feeding it with small pieces of wood, watching the color of the interior, which glows a deep orange when the bread goes in. The smell of that bread and of the wood smoke beneath it drifts out into the street. It moves slowly in the still air, finding the intersections where lanes meet, curling gently around corners. It is one of those smells that carries an almost particular kind of comfort, warm and yeasty and familiar, the same smell that has been rising from bakeries in human settlements since long before Rome existed. It asks nothing. It simply moves through the dark and cool streets and dissolves into the night. The bakery itself, if you were to pass its half-open door in this pre-dawn hour, would show you a scene of unhurried labor. The grain for Roman bread comes already milled in many cases, but some bakers still do their own milling on the premises. Large millstones, driven by donkeys or by human labor, stand in the back of the larger establishments. The millstones are volcanic basalt, usually brought from quarries near Naples, and they have a specific shape, a lower conical stone around which an upper stone fits and rotates. The grinding is slow work, rhythmic. The sound of it, a low circular groan that one can sometimes hear from the street, though not now, not in this hour. The bread being made in this city is mostly a round, flattened loaf. Archaeologists have found preserved examples in cities buried by Vesuvius, which is even now, unknown to anyone in Rome this summer, building towards something unimaginable. But that is not part of this dark and quiet hour. This hour belongs to the bread. The loaves are scored with a knife before baking, divided into 8 segments that allow them to be broken apart easily and evenly. They will be sold from the bakery counter, a wide stone slab at street level with round holes cut into it, where the loaves sit waiting for customers. The streets in the Subura are paved with large, irregular polygons of dark volcanic stone called basalt, the same stone used throughout the city for the major roads. The stones fit together with remarkable tightness, though the centuries of foot traffic and cartwheels have worn their surfaces smooth, and in places slightly dished. In the center of the lane, a slight ridge runs along the length of the street, creating a slow drainage slope to either side. Small stepping stones cross at intervals, allowing pedestrians to step across the street without walking through the runoff that collects in the lower channels. These stones are worn too, shaped by generations of feet that knew exactly where they were without needing to look. Cats move through these streets at this hour. Rome has always had cats. They have lived in the city for centuries, keeping down the rodents that inevitably gather wherever grain is stored. A cat now crosses a patch of faint light from a doorway lamp, pauses, and continues without hurry into the shadow beyond. Somewhere in the upper floors of a nearby insula, a baby makes a sound, brief and half awake, and then falls quiet again. The air smells of several things at once, as it always does in this city. The bread and wood smoke from the bakeries, the faint sweetness of damp stone, something from the fuller's workshop a little way down the lane, where cloth is cleaned and treated. The fulleries of Rome used fermented urine in their cleaning process, collected in large jars set out on street corners for public use. The smell is present even hours after the day's work has stopped, worked into the stones of the alley around the workshop. One grows accustomed to it, as one grows accustomed to all the layered smells of a very old and very full city. In an hour or so, the first carts will begin to leave. During the day, Rome restricted heavy-wheeled traffic within the city limits, so the delivery of goods, the hauling of building materials, the movement of supplies to the warehouses near the river, all of this had to happen at night, or in the gray margins around dawn. The carts are already loaded in the freight yards and stables on the edges of the city, waiting for the right moment to move. Their time is almost here, but not yet. For now the streets belong to the cats and the bakers and the slow dissipating warmth of sleeping bodies in the buildings above. The Tiber is not far away, flowing in its unhurried way through the city. At this hour, it holds a particular stillness on its surface, not quite dark, not quite reflecting, simply existing in the way that large bodies of moving water exist at night, present and quiet. The river smells of itself, muddy and cool, and the smell carries up through the lower streets when the air moves from the west. Above the city, the stars are beginning to lose a little of their sharpness. Not much, not yet, but somewhere below the horizon to the east, the light is gathering itself very slowly, the way things gather that have no urgency about them, that know they will arrive in their own time. The fourth watch continues. The bread continues baking. The stones hold their coolness. The city sleeps, mostly. And the ones who are awake move gently through the dark, tending their fires, watching their dough, letting the last of the night pass around them like a slow and patient river. The sky above Rome is changing now. It happens slowly, the way all the best changes happen, without announcement, without drama, simply a gradual softening of the darkness overhead. The deepest blue of the night, that rich almost black that settled over the city in the hours just past, is beginning to loosen at its edges. Up above the Capitoline Hill, where the great temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus stands in its heavy, sleeping silence, there is the first suggestion of something lighter. Not quite color yet, not quite light, just a faint easing of the dark, as though the sky itself has taken a slow, quiet breath. This moment had a name in Rome: Prima Luce, the first light. It arrived not as a sudden thing, but as a long, gentle arrival, the way a tide comes in across a wide, flat shore, so gradually that no single moment can be named as the turning. The air is still cool. The great stones of the city, the basalt paving blocks laid down in the streets, the marble steps of temples, the rough tufa walls of the older insulae, all of them have been releasing the warmth of the previous day through the long hours of night, and now they are at their coolest. There is a stillness in that coolness, a kind of held breath in the stone, and yet the city is not entirely still. Even now, in this pale and early hour, there is movement in the streets, the rumble of wooden wheels over basalt, the low breathing of oxen, the occasional soft call of a driver to his animal, a sound more felt than heard, low and unhurried. The law in Rome was clear on this matter. During the hours of daylight, when the streets filled with citizens and merchants, and the general press of a city of perhaps 1,000,000 souls, the heavy carts were banned from the roads within the city walls. It was a practical rule, established generations earlier, born of necessity. The streets of Rome were narrow. Many of them were extraordinarily narrow, barely wide enough for two people to pass each other comfortably, let alone for a loaded wagon to make its way through. And so the delivery of heavy goods, the grain, the wine, the timber, the stone, the great clay jars of olive oil, all of it was pushed into the hours of darkness. This meant that the nights in Rome were never entirely quiet. Those who lived on the ground floors of the insulae, the apartment buildings that rose in some neighborhoods 4 and 5 stories above the streets, learned to sleep through the grinding rumble of iron-rimmed wheels on stone. Juvenal, writing a generation or so from now, would complain bitterly about it. The noise of the city at night, the carts, the shouting, the endless movement. But on this particular morning, in the last slow minutes before dawn proper arrives, the carts are making their final runs. Here comes one now, moving along one of the broader streets that leads down from the hills toward the Forum Valley. It is a heavy flat cart, drawn by 2 oxen moving at the unhurried pace that oxen always keep, indifferent to urgency, following the rhythm of their own slow legs. The driver sits at the front, wrapped in a dark wool cloak against the last of the night's coolness, the reins loose in his hands. The cart is loaded with amphorae, those tall 2-handled clay jars, packed in straw and wedged against each other. Wine, most likely, coming from the warehouses along the Tiber, where river barges have been unloading since yesterday evening. The wheels find every irregularity in the basalt, and the sound rolls out ahead and behind, a low, rhythmic grinding, almost like a slow heartbeat beneath the quiet of the streets. The oxen breathe. Their hooves fall with a soft heaviness. The cart moves on. Somewhere behind, another cart follows at a distance, carrying timber from the yards near the river. And further along a side street, a mule train is making its way through a narrower passage, the animals picking their steps carefully over the uneven stones, the rope harnesses creaking softly with each movement. All of this will be finished soon. As the sky continues to lighten, as the color shifts from that pale steel blue suggestion toward the first warmth of amber touching the tops of the hills, the carters will feel the change and move toward the gates, toward the roads outside the walls, where they will wait through the long day before the night allows them back in again. It is a kind of rhythm that the city breathes by, a daily tide of commerce, pushing in through the darkness and pulling back before the light. The vigils are still walking their rounds. The vigils were Rome's night watchmen, 7 cohorts of them spread across the 14 regions of the city, responsible for both fire prevention and the maintenance of order in the dark hours. Fire was the great terror of Rome. The city was dense, built largely of wood and plaster and thatch in the older quarters, and fire moved through it with dreadful speed when it came. vigils carried buckets and hooks and pumps. They knew the streets of their assigned regions intimately, knew which buildings were old and poorly maintained, knew where the water sources were, knew the rhythm of the night. But in this quiet hour, on this particular summer morning, with the sky just beginning to color at its highest edges, the fires of the night have not come. The city has slept, and the vigils have walked their slow circuits without urgency. Their sandals make a familiar sound on the stones, a steady, unhurried rhythm that the residents of the ground floors have long since stopped noticing. Two of them are walking together now along a street that runs parallel to the Forum of Augustus. They are not speaking. After a full night of rounds, there is not much left to say, and the morning approaching has its own kind of quiet that neither man wants to disturb. One of them carries a long staff. The other has a lantern, though the flame inside it has been burning low for an hour, and the light it casts is barely more than a warm, pale flicker at knee height. The sky above them is providing its own light now, slow and gray-blue, filtering down between the rooftops. They will walk for another hour, perhaps a little more, before the morning shift comes to relieve them. Then they will make their way back to the statio, the watch station for their cohort, and they will eat and sleep through the morning while the city rises fully into its day. It is a life measured in circuits, in the careful listening of dark streets, in the smell of smoke checked or smoke found and acted on. It is not a glamorous life, but it is a steady one. And on mornings like this, when the sky is shifting through its quiet palette above the rooftops, and the city is moving toward its waking, there is something in it that is almost peaceful. The amber is strengthening now at the top of the Capitoline. The great hill, with its temples and its long political memory, is catching the very first edge of the coming sun, while the streets below it remain in cool shadow. The color is gentle, not the bright gold of full morning, not the orange of a dramatic sunrise, just a soft, warm amber laying itself quietly along the uppermost contours of the hill, touching the corners of roof lines, catching the top of a column here and there. Below, the Forum Valley is still dim. The long open space of the Forum Romanum, with its temples and rostrums and sacred spaces, its paving stones worn smooth by centuries of feet, is gathered in its last few minutes of emptiness. The temples stand as they always stand. The round temple of Vesta, with its eternal flame, tended through the night by the Vestal virgins within its walls. The temple of Saturn at the foot of the Capitoline steps. The older structures, whose stones have absorbed so many years of the city's life that they seem almost to breathe on their own. No one is walking there yet. The space holds itself quietly under the lightening sky. A bird calls from somewhere along the Palatine Hill. Then another answering from a garden or a rooftop further along the slope. The sound is small and clear in the cool air, rising up over the stones with an ease that nothing heavier than birdsong seems to manage in a city like this. The cartwheels are growing quieter now. moving away through the further streets toward the gates. The vigils walk on, turning the corner of a long wall, their footsteps steady and unhurried on the stones. And the sky above Rome continues its slow, certain shift from deep to pale, from cool to the first suggestion of warmth, moving toward the morning as it has always moved, as it will always move, patient and unhurried over the ancient stones of the city. As the first pale light begins to soften the edges of the city, something very quiet happens all across Rome. It happens on the upper floors of the tall apartment buildings, the insulae, that rise 4 and 5 stories above the narrow streets. It happens in the ground floor shops pressed against the bases of those same buildings. It happens in the small rooms behind bakeries, and in the spaces above wine bars, and in the modest chambers where craftsmen sleep near their tools. All across the city, in the space of a single slow hour, wooden shutters begin to open. There is no glass in these windows. Glass exists in Rome in this year, but it is rare and thick, and lets through only a murky, greenish kind of light. The windows of ordinary Roman rooms are simply openings in the wall, rectangular holes cut through the plaster and the brick, and at night they are closed by wooden shutters, hinged and latched from within, that keep out the darkness and the noise and the cool of the night air. Now, in the early morning, those latches are lifted. The sound is very small. A wooden bar slides back. A shutter swings on its hinge. There is a faint creak, then the soft thud of a shutter folded back against the outer wall. And then the air moves. The morning air of Rome in summer is already warm, but it carries something that the shut room does not have. It carries the faint smell of the street, of basalt stones still damp from the water carts that came through in the night, of bread beginning to bake somewhere not far away, of the particular dusty, mineral smell of a city waking up. On the Vicus Tuscus, one of the old streets that runs through the lower part of the city between the Capitoline Hill and the Tiber, a taberna is preparing to open. The Vicus Tuscus is one of the busiest commercial streets in Rome, lined on both sides with small shops selling all manner of things. And the taberna here, this particular one, deals in olive oil and dry goods, chickpeas, lentils, dried figs, salt fish packed in jars, the small, useful things that a city needs every day in great quantities. The front of the taberna is wide. This is how most Roman ground floor shops are built, with a broad open frontage that faces the street directly. No door in the ordinary sense, just a wide opening that is closed at night by a series of heavy wooden boards slotted into grooves cut into the stone threshold and the lintel overhead. Each morning, these boards must be lifted out one by one and carried to the back of the shop. And each evening, they must be carried back out and slotted into place again. The man who owns this shop has been doing this for a very long time. He is not a young man. His name is not something history has kept for us, but he would have had one, a good Latin name, or perhaps a Greek one, because many of the merchants and tradespeople who kept shop in Rome during this period had come from the eastern parts of the empire, or were the children or grandchildren of people who had. He moves slowly this morning, not from any particular tiredness, but in the way of a person who has learned over many years that there is no advantage in rushing the morning. The boards come out in a particular order. He knows without thinking which one comes first. As the boards are removed, the shop opens, quite literally, to the street. The counter at the front is built of masonry, of brick and concrete faced with marble chips, and it is set at a height that allows a person standing in the street to lean their arms on it comfortably. Set into the top of this counter are large round openings, like the holes in a great stone table, and into each of these openings rests the round belly of a large ceramic vessel. These are the dolia, the storage jars embedded in the counter, and they hold the loose goods that the shop sells by measure. Dried beans in one, lentils in another, perhaps chickpeas, or perhaps barley or spelt, depending on what is selling well this week. The proprietor moves around his counter now, checking what is in each vessel, pressing his hand down into the cool, dry contents in the way of someone confirming what he already knows. He lifts the linen cloth that has been resting over the opening in one of the dolia and sets it aside. He does not need to measure anything yet. The first customers will not come for a little while. Along the back wall of the shop and on shelves to one side, the amphorae stand in rows. These are the tall two-handled ceramic jars in which olive oil travels across the Roman world, and they are everywhere in Rome, leaning against walls, stacked in warehouses, lining the shelves of shops like this one. The olive oil in this shop has come from somewhere in the Western Mediterranean, from Spain perhaps, or from North Africa, both of which produce oil in vast quantities and ship it in these tall jars stamped with marks that tell those who can read them where the oil came from, who produced it, how much it weighs. The proprietor lifts one of the smaller amphorae, tilts it slightly, and sets it back in its place. He takes a few small terracotta dishes from a shelf at the back of the shop and carries them to the counter, setting them out in a line. These are for samples or for small purchases. A customer might bring a little jar from home, a simple clay vessel with a handle, and have it filled with oil here, measured out by the proprietor with a bronze ladle into the dish, and then poured into the customer's container. This is a transaction that will happen many times today. The street outside is beginning to show the first signs of daytime life. The last of the night carts is long gone now, rumbled away before the light strengthened enough to make their presence illegal under the rules that keep wheeled traffic out of the city during the day. A few people are moving on the Vicus Tuscus, walking with the particular purposefulness of people who have somewhere to be early. A water carrier passes with a wooden yoke across his shoulders and two clay jugs hanging from it. A woman in a dark tunic moves quickly toward the larger street at the end of the block. The proprietor does not watch them closely. He is arranging the small dishes in the particular configuration he always uses, a matter of habit more than any conscious decision. 20 years, or something close to it, of mornings like this one have made the arrangement automatic. The 3 dishes in a line, the small bronze ladle in the largest of them, the cloth for wiping the counter draped over the edge where his left hand can reach it easily. There's a smell that belongs to this shop, the warm, slightly grassy smell of good olive oil, the dusty smell of dried legumes, the faint sharpness of salt. These smells have soaked into the plaster of the walls over the years, into the stone of the counter, and on a warm morning like this one, they rise easily. The air coming in from the street mixes with the air inside the shop, which has been shut all night, and the combined smell is very particular to this place and to this hour. On the upper floors of the building above the shop, and in the buildings across the narrow street, more shutters are being opened. A woman on the 2nd floor pushes her shutters wide and leans out for a moment, looking down at the Vicus Tuscus below. The light is still quite soft, the shadows on the street still long and cool, though the sky above is a clear pale blue that promises a hot day. She looks at the sky for a moment, in the way that people have always checked the sky in the morning to see what the day will bring. And then she pulls back from the window and goes about whatever she does first in the morning. The wooden shutters of the buildings on either side of the street hang open now, most of them, folded back against the plaster and the brick, some painted in faded ochre or red, some plain weathered wood. They catch the light differently at this hour, the ones facing east holding a faint warmth, the ones on the shaded side of the street still in the gray of shadow. The proprietor of the oil and dry goods shop steps to the front of his counter and looks out at the Vicus Tuscus. Nothing he sees is surprising to him. The street is the same street it was yesterday morning and the morning before that. The buildings are the same. The quality of the light at this particular hour is the same. He rests his hands on the cool edge of the marble-faced counter and waits, in no particular hurry, for the morning to continue becoming itself. The bread from the night before is still good. It sits wrapped in a piece of linen on a wooden shelf, or on the low stone ledge near the cooking brazier, and in the early morning a hand reaches for it without ceremony, without particular thought. This is how the day begins for most people in Rome, not with warmth, not with anything elaborate, just a piece of yesterday's bread, and the quiet presence of a room beginning to fill with light. The bread itself is dense and round, made from emmer wheat, or sometimes a coarser grain, baked in the public bakeries that line the lower streets. The bakers, the pistors, as they are called, have been working since well before dawn, and the loaves were sold in the late afternoon and evening of the previous day, carried home under an arm or tucked into the fold of a tunic. By morning, the bread has settled into itself, grown a little firmer, and this is entirely fine. A piece torn away and dipped slowly into a small dish of olive oil becomes something almost tender. The oil is green gold in color, pressed from Sabine or Campanian olives, and it soaks into the bread with a softness that is one of the small, reliable pleasures of an ordinary morning. Some people add a few olives alongside. The olives are dark or pale, depending on the season and the source, preserved in brine or in their own oil, and they sit in small clay dishes with the easy familiarity of things that are always present. A fig, perhaps, if there are figs. They come into season through the summer months, and in late July and August they are heavy and dark-skinned, sweet enough to eat with nothing added. A piece of cheese, sometimes hard and sharp, the kind that keeps well without a cold room. None of this takes very long. There is no table set, no particular arrangement. People eat standing near the doorway, or sitting on the edge of a low bed, or moving already toward the street with bread in hand. The morning meal in Rome is less a meal than a moment, a small preparation, an acknowledgement that the day requires something before it begins. And then the door is open, and the street is there, full of its own particular morning quality. The streets of Rome in the early hours of a summer morning hold a kind of light that exists nowhere else. It arrives at a low angle, following the line of the hills, and it catches the surfaces of things in a way that feels almost deliberate. The white of freshly plastered walls, the warm ochre and terracotta of the facades that line the narrow lanes, the pale limestone of a doorstep worn smooth by years of feet. Shadows are still long and deeply blue at this hour, pooling at the bases of walls, lying across the streets in cool bands that are pleasant to walk through. The Viminal and the Quirinal, the Aventine, the slopes of the Caelian. From all these hills, the people of Rome begin their slow descent toward the lower city. There is no single moment when this happens. It is not a procession. It is more like a gradual gathering of movement, individual figures stepping out of doorways and joining a current that has no visible source, only a direction. Down toward the Forum, down toward the river, down toward the places where the day's business will be conducted. Along the way, there are fountains. Rome in 79 AD is a city fed by water with extraordinary generosity. The aqueducts, the Aqua Claudia, the Aqua Marcia, the Aqua Virgo among them, carry water into the city from sources many miles away. Some of it traveling elevated on great arched structures across the plain. Some of it running underground through pipes of terracotta and lead. The water arrives in the city and is distributed to the public fountains that stand at corners and crossroads throughout the residential districts. And these fountains run continuously, day and night. They are not ornate, as a rule. They are practical things: a stone basin, a pipe, a constant flow of cold, clear water that overflows into a channel in the street. But they are present everywhere, and in the morning they are gathering points. People stop to drink, to splash water on their face and neck, to fill a small jar to carry home. The sound of running water is woven through the texture of a Roman morning, the way birdsong is woven through other places, not noticed particularly, but missed immediately if it were gone. Beside many of these fountains, or at intervals along the walls of the lower streets, there are small shrines. The Lares Compitals, the guardian spirits of the crossroads and the neighborhood, are honored in these modest installations, which might be no more than a niche cut into the plaster of a wall, painted with simple figures, hung with a garland of small flowers. The flowers are fresh this morning, placed there perhaps the evening before, or perhaps in the very early hours by someone whose habit this is. Marigolds, violets when they are in season, small bunches of rosemary whose scent mixes with the smells of the morning street, baking bread, stone dust, the faint sharpness of the water from the fountain. People pass these shrines without stopping, for the most part, but they acknowledge them in the way that people acknowledge familiar and trusted things. A glance, a slight inclination of the head. The shrines ask for nothing elaborate. They are simply there, a kind of quiet presence at the margins of the everyday. The walk toward the Forum Romanum, depending on where one starts, might take a quarter of an hour, or perhaps a little more. The streets narrow and then widen. There are steps in places, worn stone steps descending between high walls. There are points where two streets come together, and a small plaza opens up, just wide enough to breathe, where a fig tree grows from a crack in the wall, and a dog lies in a patch of sun with perfect stillness. The dog does not move as people pass. It has found its spot for the morning, and the morning is long and warm, and there is no reason at all to move. The Forum itself begins to announce itself before it arrives. The scale of the buildings changes. The streets widen. The roof lines pull back, and the sky opens, and there, ahead, is the long, flat space of the Forum Romanum, with its columns and temples, and the particular golden light that Rome saves for its best surfaces. The marble of the temple facades catches the morning sun differently from anything else. It does not simply reflect light. It seems to hold it, to warm slightly under it, to glow with a quality that is almost amber, almost honey-colored, though the marble itself is white. This is the hour for which the Forum's buildings seem to have been designed. The proportions of the columns are easier to see now than they will be at midday, when the overhead light flattens everything. Now they rise clearly against a sky that is still pale at the horizon, deepening to a full Roman summer blue overhead, and their shadows fall long and clean across the stone pavement at their bases. People are arriving from every direction, from the Sacra Via that curves down from the Palatine, from the Argentum to the north, where the booksellers have their stalls, and the smell of papyrus and fresh ink drifts out into the street, from the lanes behind the Basilica Aemilia. The Forum fills slowly, the way a courtyard fills with morning warmth, not all at once, but steadily, the density of movement increasing by degrees, until there is a sense of a city in its proper state of wakefulness. A man carries a wooden writing tablet. Another rolls the hem of his toga a little higher against the warmth that is already beginning to build. Two women cross the open space with the quick, deliberate walk of people with a purpose, baskets on their arms. A slave moves through the crowd with a terracotta jar balanced easily on one shoulder, navigating without effort through gaps that appear and close in the movement of people. The olive oil vendor from the Vicus Tuscus sent his young assistant in this direction, a little while ago with a message for a merchant whose stall is near the Basilica Iulia. And the boy is here somewhere in this slow tide of morning arrivals, walking with the particular careful posture of someone carrying something important without being entirely sure what it contains. The city is fully awake now. The light is still golden, still low enough to be beautiful, but it will not be that way for much longer. The morning is moving forward, the way mornings do, in its own unhurried and inexorable way, and Rome is moving with it. By the second hour of the day, the sun has lifted itself clear of the hills to the east, and its light falls fully now across the open stone of the Forum Romanum. The long shadows of the early morning have shortened. The marble of the temples has moved from pale gray to a warm, almost honeyed white. The air still holds a trace of the night's coolness, but only a trace, and already that coolness is beginning to soften and give way to what will become, by midday, a heavy and generous summer heat. The Forum is not a quiet place in the morning hours. It has not been quiet since before sunrise, really, when the first merchants and water carriers began to move through. But there is a particular quality to the noise of the second hour that sets it apart from the noise of the street or the noise of the market. It is a noise made largely of voices, of Latin spoken at different speeds, in different registers, with the particular music of many different regions carried into the city by people who have come from all across the empire and settled here, or who are passing through, or who have come on some specific errand that has brought them to this place, to this particular stone heart of the world. A man from the southern coast speaks with a softness in his vowels. A trader who grew up far to the east shapes his Latin around the edges of another language entirely, and the result is something slightly different again, something with its own rhythm. A lawyer dictating notes to his secretary speaks in the clipped, practiced cadences of a man who has spent many years choosing words carefully. All of this sound moves together in the open air of the Forum, rising gently toward the blue sky above, mixing with the sound of sandals on stone, the occasional low sound of an ox or a mule from the direction of the cattle market not far away, and from somewhere to the northeast, carried on the still morning air, the steady rhythmic sound of hammering. That hammering has been going on for some time now, for several years, in fact. Under the Emperor Vespasian, who has ruled now for nearly a decade, a great construction project has been underway on the low ground between the Esquiline, the Caelian, and the Palatine hills, where Nero's vast and somewhat resented private lake once sat. Crews of workers have been draining, leveling, and building. The structure rising there is intended to be an amphitheater on a scale the city has not seen before. The work proceeds steadily, methodically. Stone is brought in, fitted, shaped. The walls rise in their careful courses. On this summer morning in the year 79, the hammering arrives in the Forum as a kind of distant pulse, absorbed into the general texture of the morning's noise, noticeable if one listens for it, and not noticeable if one does not. The The forum itself is old, very old. The ground beneath these stones has been the gathering place of this city for centuries, and the buildings that line it carry that age in their proportions and in the weathering of their stone. The Temple of Saturn stands to the west, its columns old and slightly uneven in the way of very ancient things, its podium rising in broad steps above the level of the square. The Temple of Castor and Pollux stands a little to the south, 3 columns still catching the morning light with particular elegance. The rostra, the great speaking platform faced with the bronze rams of captured ships, sits where it has long sat, its surface worn smooth by generations of feet and hands. Around and between these old structures, the morning business of the city is quietly unfolding. There are lawyers here, several of them, identifiable by the rolls of papyrus tucked under their arms, and by the small clusters of clients gathered around them. A case that will be heard later in the day is being discussed in low, careful tones. A petitioner from somewhere in the provinces, wearing a toga that is slightly too large for him and has been folded with more enthusiasm than skill, waits near the edge of the Basilica Iulia, the long pillared hall on the southern edge of the forum, where much of the city's legal business takes place. He has been waiting for some time. He will likely wait for some time more. Waiting is very much a part of life in the forum in the morning hours. The money changers have their tables set up in the usual places. Their work is quiet and continuous. A coin examined, a calculation made on a small abacus or on fingers, a sum agreed upon, another coin or a combination of smaller ones slid across the wooden surface of the table. The Roman world uses many coins from many places, and a man who travels or trades must often convert between them, and the money changers are here for exactly this purpose. They are patient men, generally. They have a particular stillness about them, the stillness of people whose work requires sustained attention to small, precise things. A scribe sits near one of the columns of the basilica, with a stylus and a wax tablet resting on his knee. He is for hire, a man who writes letters or petitions, or simple documents for those who need such things written and do not write well themselves, or at all. The scratch of the stylus on wax is a small, papery sound, barely audible in the general murmur of the forum, but present. It is one of the particular sounds of this place in these hours, part of the layered texture of morning here. People move through in the particular way of people who have no single purpose, or who have paused on their way to some purpose elsewhere. A group of men stand talking near the temple of Vesta, where the sacred flame burns, as it has burned without interruption for as long as anyone can remember, tended by the Vestal virgins, whose house stands close by, its round walls quiet and slightly apart from the general activity of the square. The men talking are not discussing anything of obvious importance. They are discussing something that happened yesterday, or something that a mutual acquaintance has done, or the progress of some ongoing situation in the city. They gesture occasionally. They laugh once, a low, easy laugh. They are not in any particular hurry. The smells of the Forum in the morning are their own mixture. There is the mineral smell of old stone warming in the sun. There is the thin, dry smell of papyrus and wax. There is occasionally, from the direction of one of the small food stalls that operate in the areas just beyond the formal limits of the square, the warm smell of something baking or of oil heating in a shallow pan. There is the smell of incense drifting from one of the temples where morning offerings have been made, a thin, sweetish smoke that disperses quickly in the open air, but lingers just long enough to be noticed. A boy of perhaps 10 or 11 years moves through the crowd with the purposeful ease of someone who knows this place well. He carries a small wooden box, the kind a student might use to carry writing materials. He is on his way somewhere, perhaps to one of the grammar teachers who hold their lessons in rented spaces near the Forum, perhaps somewhere else entirely. He navigates between the groups of standing men without slowing, without looking up particularly, moving through the familiar morning geography of this place as though it were simply an extension of his own household. The sun continues to climb. Its light has moved past the temples now and reaches the full breadth of the square, and the stone of the Forum begins to give back the warmth it is receiving. In a few hours, this same stone will be very hot underfoot, and the number of people seeking the shade of the porticos and the cool interiors of the basilica will increase considerably. But that is still some distance away. For now, in the second hour of the morning, the warmth is simply pleasant, the light simply clear, and the Forum simply itself, old, busy in its particular way, full of the soft and continuous human noise of a city going about its business. The hammering from the northeast continues its patient rhythm, rising and fading slightly as the air moves. Work continues on the great amphitheater. Work continues on the city, as it always has, as it presumably always will. The morning moves forward at its own unhurried pace, and the voices of the Forum rise and mix and settle and rise again, Latin in many accents, under a summer sky that is very blue and very still. The sun has moved a little higher now, not high enough yet to be called fierce, but high enough that the stones of the Forum have begun to hold their warmth, and the people who have been standing in the open spaces have started, quietly and without much hurry, to drift toward the edges of things, toward the columns, toward the wide overhanging porticos where the shadow falls in long, cool bars across the ground. This is a city that understands shade the way a river understands its banks. It moves naturally toward what shelters it, along the southern edge of the Forum, and wrapping around toward the older streets that lead down from the Capitoline. The Basilica Aemilia stretches its long colonnaded face to the world. It is one of the great buildings of the Forum, rebuilt and repaired many times over the centuries, its portico wide enough that several people can walk abreast without touching. In the mornings, especially in summer, the space beneath those columns becomes something between a marketplace and a gathering place. Merchants have been arriving since before full light, setting down their goods on cloth spread over the stone, or balancing their wares on low wooden boards propped up on legs that fold away easily when the day is done. What they sell is modest, for the most part, not the grand trade of the merchant ships or the bulk goods that arrive by barge up the Tiber. This is the smaller commerce of daily life, the things that a person needs or wants or simply notices while passing through. There are bundles of dried herbs. Rosemary, its gray-green stems tied with a length of rough cord. Dried thyme in smaller bundles. Bundles of dried bay leaves, their edges curled, releasing a faint green bitterness into the air when someone leans close. The herbs come from gardens on the slopes of the hills around Rome, from small plots kept by women who know which plants prefer the drier soil and which want shade and water. The woman selling them this morning is not young and not old. She sits on a low stool behind her spread of bundles and does not call out or perform her wares. She simply sits, and people stop, and money and herbs change hands in a kind of easy silence. A few steps away, a man has arranged a small collection of bronze amulets on a square of dark cloth. They are simple things, made by hands that knew what they were doing, but were not straining toward beauty. There are small lunula, crescent-shaped pendants that have been worn for luck and against ill will for as long as anyone in Rome can remember. There are tiny hands with the index and little finger raised, the manophyca gesture that wards away the evil eye. There's a small figure that might be a Lares, one of the household gods, though it is simple enough that it might be other things too. The man who sells them has several strung on a cord around his own neck, which is perhaps the best kind of advertisement. His prices are not fixed. He will discuss them with anyone who wishes to discuss them, and the conversation tends to be unhurried. Second-hand sandals are harder to display elegantly, but the man selling them makes a reasonable effort. He has arranged them in pairs on the ground, the better ones at the front. They are well worn, but not ruined, resoled in some cases with new leather stitched carefully over the old. A sandal in Rome is not replaced lightly. Good leather is worth repairing, worth passing along, worth finding on a second-hand table and examining with some care. A child standing near the display picks up a small sandal and holds it against the sole of her own foot, looking up at the man with a question that needs no words. The smell of salt fish arrives before you see where it is coming from. It is a smell that belongs completely to this world, familiar and sharp, and not quite unpleasant if you have grown up beside it, which most people here have. A vendor has brought a wooden box lined with broad green leaves, fig leaves, most likely, and inside are pieces of salt fish folded and pressed into those leaves, and then closed over them like small packages. It is a practical way to carry a perishable thing, and the leaves hold some moisture, and the whole arrangement travels better than loose fish would. The vendor unwraps one to show a potential buyer, and the smell intensifies briefly before the leaf is folded closed again. They talk for a moment. A coin is found. The transaction settles into completion. All of this happens in the partial shade, in the slow warmth of the mid-morning, while the sounds of the forum carry on nearby, and the distant sound of the city, carts, voices, the occasional bright ring of metal, drifts through without demanding attention. There are smaller things too. A woman with a basket of early figs, very round and heavy, the skin beginning to split at the tips, where the sweetness is closest to the surface. A boy moving through the colonnade with a board of small round cheeses wrapped in cloth. A man selling a kind of thick sauce in small clay pots, each pot sealed with a plug of cloth soaked in oil, the sauce inside salty and fermented, and full of the particular depth that Romans find essential at the table. And then there is the Macelum. To reach it from the forum, one walks a short distance, through streets that narrow and then open again, past buildings whose walls are covered in painted announcements, and the names of gladiators, and sometimes just marks that mean nothing much to anyone now, if they ever did. The Macelum sits in its own space, a proper covered market, not just a stretch of ground where people happen to be selling things. It is an older institution by this point in Roman life. The idea of a roofed place for the sale of food and provisions, and Rome's version of it has been settled and familiar for generations. Entering from the street, there is a change in the quality of the air. Not cold, but cooler. The light comes from above, through openings in the roof, and it falls in wide pools that are bright at their centers and fade at their edges. The sound changes too. It becomes more contained, more interior. The voices of vendors and buyers reflecting slightly off the stone walls and giving everything a warmer, closer quality. At the heart of the Macelum is a round structure, a tholos, set above a pool of fresh water. The pool is not large, but the water moves in it, fed from one of the city's aqueducts, and the fish kept there are alive, swimming slowly in the cool dimness beneath the open sky above the tholos roof. A buyer can choose their fish while it is still living, which is considered the best assurance of freshness, and the fishmonger will take it from the water with practiced ease. The sound of that water, moving gently in its stone basin, is one of the particular sounds of this place, and it runs underneath everything else like a quiet thread. The smell in the Macelum is of fish and water and stone, and the green smell of the leaves used for wrapping, and the faint sweet rot of the very freshest shellfish, which is not so much an unpleasant smell as an honest one. It is a smell that speaks of the sea, of the long routes by which things travel to reach this inland city. Oysters come up from the coast, packed in their shells, kept cold with river ice in the wagons that bring them in before dawn. By mid-morning, they are laid out on slabs of stone, still cool, still carrying the salt water of their origin. Around the central pool, the stalls and counters line the interior walls, dried legumes in sacks and shallow baskets, grain kept in large ceramic vessels, honey in clay jars, each jar sealed and labeled in a rough hand. Olive oil in narrow-necked amphorae, the good oil poured out carefully for tasting by customers who take their time, who hold the small poured measure up and consider it before nodding or not nodding, before reaching for a coin or moving on. People move through the Macelum without hurrying. The shade makes that easy. The cool air makes that easy. The sound of the water in the central pool makes it very easy to simply stand for a moment and not be anywhere in particular, to be only here, in this covered space where the city comes to feed itself, where the commerce of eating, which is really the most fundamental commerce of all, proceeds in its calm and daily way. A cat sits in the corner beneath a counter of dried fish, watching the activity with the serene detachment of a creature that knows the day will eventually bring something worth attending to. For now, it simply waits, eyes half closed, tail wrapped around its feet. The picture of unhurried patience in a city that is, for this one cool hour, not quite in a hurry either. The sun has reached its highest point now, and the city has begun to soften beneath it. The stones of the streets hold the heat like something living. The air above the rooftops shimmers faintly. Shutters that were open in the morning have been pulled closed again, and the narrow lanes between the insula blocks have grown quieter, the voices in them fewer and more distant. This is the long middle of a Roman summer day, the hours when the city does not exactly stop, but slows itself down to something closer to stillness. Many Romans rest through these hours. It is a reasonable and well-established habit. The body has been busy since before dawn, and the warmth that felt so pleasant in the early morning has become something heavier now, something that sits on the shoulders and makes the eyelids want to close. Those who can return home, those who cannot find shade where they are able, and those who have a little time and a small coin to spare often turn their steps toward the baths. Rome in this year has no shortage of them. There are hundreds of bathhouses scattered through the city, from the grand and the public to the modest and the neighborhood. Some are large enough to hold many hundreds of people at once. Some are quiet establishments tucked into the ground floors of apartment buildings, known mainly to the people who live nearby. The baths built under Agrippa nearly a century ago still stand and still welcome visitors. New ones are always being planned, always being built, because the Romans understand that a bathhouse is not a luxury, but a feature of an orderly life, as necessary to the city as its fountains and its roads. The entrance to one of the larger public baths is not a grand affair. There is a door, and beside the door, a person who collects the fee, which is small enough that almost anyone can manage it. Inside, the first thing a visitor notices is the change in the quality of the air. Outside, it is dry and hot, and carries the smell of dust and animals and sun-warmed stone. Inside, there is moisture in the air, a faint warmth that comes from beneath the floors, and a smell that is clean and slightly mineral. The smell of water that has been heated in great lead and clay boilers somewhere deeper in the building. The first room is the apoditerium, the place for undressing. It is not heated in the way the inner rooms are, but it is not cool either. The walls are plastered and painted in warm colors, reds and ochres, and along the walls there are small numbered niches where clothing can be left. Sandals are set beneath the benches. A person settling into one of these benches, beginning to unfasten a tunic, is already beginning to slow down, already leaving behind the noise and pace of the street outside. There are other people here, of course. The baths are a social place, and the Romans have no particular feeling that bathing should be private or silent. There is conversation. There is the low sound of voices that echo slightly off the tiled walls, bouncing gently in a way that softens everything, rounds off the edges of words, so that what reaches the ears is more like the general sound of human presence than any particular thing being said. Someone is telling something to someone else. A reply comes back, and laughter, brief and easy. Then the voices settle again. From the apoditerium, the way leads forward into the tepidarium. This is the warm room, and it lives up to its name in the most gentle way possible. The temperature here is moderate, welcoming rather than demanding. The floor is warm underfoot. This is the work of the hypocaust, the ingenious system of channels and small pillars beneath the floor that carry hot air from the furnaces at the building's heart outward through every heated room. The Romans have understood for some time that heat travels, that it can be guided and distributed, and the hypocaust is the practical expression of this understanding. Walking on the tepidarium floor in bare feet, one is aware of a steady and even warmth coming up through the tiles, as if the ground itself were holding something gentle. The walls of the tepidarium are paneled and vaulted. The ceiling curves high overhead. Sound moves through this room differently than it does outside. A word spoken at a normal volume returns from the far wall as a soft companion to itself, slightly delayed, slightly blurred. Many people find that their voices naturally drop here, that they speak more quietly without deciding to, the way one does in a place that is already peaceful. People sit on the low benches that line the walls. Some talk quietly. Some say nothing at all, simply sitting with their eyes half closed, letting the warmth work its way through the muscles of the back and shoulders. A slave who works in the baths moves through the room with a small jar of oil, offering to those who want it. Oil is how the Romans clean the skin. It is spread on and then scraped off with a curved metal tool called a strigil, taking with it the sweat and dust of the morning's hours. It is a slow and practical process, and it suits the pace of this room very well. Further in, the caldarium waits. The hot room. The air here is thick with steam, warm and heavy in the lungs, and the first breath of it is like stepping into something. The caldarium holds a large pool of heated water, and around the edges of the room there are smaller basins set into the walls, from which hot water can be ladled or simply touched. The floor here is too warm to stand on comfortably, for long sandals are useful, or the practiced habit of keeping moving. But the pool itself is different. Sinking into the hot water of the caldarium pool is one of the particular pleasures of a Roman day. And it is not difficult to understand why. The water is very warm, almost too warm, and for a moment the body resists it. Then something releases. The muscles of the legs, which have been walking since the dark of the morning, soften. The muscles of the back and neck, which have been holding the head upright through the noise and brightness of the forum and the markets, ease themselves downward. The face, which has been arranged in the various expressions required by a day in a busy city, becomes simply a face resting above warm water. The steam moves slowly in the air above the pool. The voices of other bathers come through it in a muffled way, as if from a small distance. There is the sound of water, the steady drip from a basin somewhere, the gentle sound of someone settling deeper into the pool. These are not sounds that ask for anything. They are simply sounds that happen, that have been happening in rooms like this one all morning, and that will go on happening all afternoon. The Romans know what this is for. The baths are where a person restores themselves to themselves, where the day, which has accumulated all sorts of things, noise, obligation, heat, hurry, is gently removed, the way oil and strigil remove what the morning left on the skin. What remains afterward is something simpler and more rested. This is understood without having to be said. A person lying in the heated water of the caldarium, while the summer sun beats down on the streets outside, exists in a particular kind of shelter. The walls of the building are thick. The furnaces are keeping the water at a steady temperature. The city continues its business out beyond the doors, and none of it comes in here. There is only the warmth and the weight of the water and the soft and shapeless sound of other people being equally still. Time moves slowly in the caldarium. This is part of its purpose. There is no particular reason to know exactly what hour it is, no pressing thing that the warm water is keeping one from. Later, there will be the cool room, the frigidarium, with its shock of cold water that wakes the body back up again and closes what the heat has opened. Later, there will be redressing and stepping back out into the afternoon and the rest of the day to be made use of. But that is later. For now, the steam rises. The water holds its heat. The voices drift. Somewhere on the other side of the thick tiled walls, the sun is still very bright and very high, and the streets are still warm, and the city is still there, patient and enormous, waiting for the afternoon to begin its slow turn toward evening. Inside, in the warm and steaming room, in the water that has been heated since before the sun came up, there is simply this: the particular quiet of a body that has stopped for a little while, insisting on anything at all. The Tiber moved slowly in the afternoon. It always moved slowly in summer, when the snowmelt from the distant Apennines had long since passed, and the river had settled into its warm season pace. Unhurried, wide, the color of old terracotta, of well-used bronze, of earth that has been carried a very long way from the hills where it began. The Romans called the river the Tigris, and they had lived beside it for so long that it had become simply part of what the city was, like the hills, like the stones of the roads, like the particular quality of the light in the late afternoon, when the sun began its slow westward lean, and the shadows stretched themselves long and thin across the ground. The western bank, the Transtiberim, sat lower and quieter in those hours. But on the eastern side, along the stretch of riverfront known as the Emporium, the afternoon had not slowed at all. The Emporium was the great working heart of the river's commercial life. A long embankment of stone and timber south of the Aventine Hill, built to receive the goods that came up from the sea. It was a serious place, practical in the way that all working places are, with none of the decoration of the forum or the polish of the temples. The stone was worn smooth in certain places by decades of use, by the dragging of ropes and the setting down of heavy things, by the feet of men who came here every day and did not think of it as remarkable at all. The grain barges arrived from Ostia. Ostia sat at the mouth of the Tiber, some 15 or 16 miles to the southwest, where the river finally gave itself to the sea. It was Rome's port, not the deep-water harbor at Puteoli, which handled much of the eastern trade, but the closer, essential place where goods were transferred from sea-going vessels to the flat-bottomed river barges that could navigate upstream. The grain came this way, enormous quantities of it, month after month, year after year, wheat from Egypt, wheat from North Africa, the steady supply that fed a city of perhaps 1 million people. The mathematics of it were extraordinary, though no one standing at the dockside was thinking about mathematics in that particular moment. The barges were wide and low in the water, their hulls dark from long use, their decks loaded with the large ceramic amphorae in which grain and oil and other goods were often transported, and with the great fabric sacks of grain itself. The men who worked the unloading moved in a rhythm that looked, from a little distance, almost like something rehearsed. A long procession from the barges deck up a plank to the dock, and then away into the warehouse buildings that lined the embankment, the Horia, where goods were stored in long, cool rooms behind thick walls. There was a crane at the water's edge. Roman cranes of this period were remarkable things. Tall timber structures, operated by a large wheel turned from inside by men walking continuously, their weight driving the mechanism, the rope climbing steadily up through a series of pulleys to lift whatever was attached below. The great crane on the Emporium turned slowly in the afternoon, its arms swinging in a long, gentle arc as it lifted amphora after amphora from the barge's hold. The rope creaked as it pulled tight. The arm moved. The amphora rose, swayed a little, was brought in over the dock, and lowered with patience to the waiting hands below. Then the rope went slack. Then it pulled tight again. This had been happening for hours. It would continue for hours more. The Tiber itself paid little attention to any of this. The river moved southward past the docks with its usual indifference, carrying on its surface the small floating evidence of city life, a twist of straw, a piece of cork, a ripple spreading outward from where a rope trailed in the current. Beneath the surface, the water was murky, as it had always been, colored by the sediment of all the land it crossed. The Romans knew this. They did not drink from the river. The aqueducts brought clean water in from distant springs, and the Tiber was for transport, for commerce, for the washing away of things, a working river, not a drinking one. But in the afternoon light, it was beautiful, in its way. When the sun dropped toward the western hills and came at the water from a low angle, the surface of the Tiber changed. The murk fell away from the appearance of it, or perhaps it simply stopped mattering, because what was visible then was the light itself, broken into long flat shapes by the slight movement of the current, shifted and rearranged by every passing barge, every rope's disturbance, every breath of wind. It looked in those moments like hammered metal, like bronze that had been worked and worked until it held a warmth inside it, not just on its surface. The color was amber and copper and something darker underneath, and it moved in that slow, continuous way that only water moves, never exactly repeating itself, never quite still. A dockworker sat for a moment at the edge of the stone steps that led down to the river's waterline. The steps were worn in that particular way of things that have been stepped on for a very long time, smooth in the center, slightly rougher at the edges, the stone gone a warm gray from years of water and weather. He was resting between tasks, perhaps. His feet were near the water, but not quite in it. He looked at the river, the way people look at things they have looked at all their lives, not studying it, not marveling at it, simply being in the same place as it, which is a different thing, and in some ways a quieter one. The rope on the crane creaked again. The amphora rose. The warehouses behind the dock, the great horia that stretched back from the river in long parallel rows. The afternoon continued its practical work. These were large, serious buildings, their walls of brick and concrete, their interiors designed for the storage of goods in quantity. The rooms inside were cool, even in summer. Grain was kept there, and oil, and wine, and the many other things that a city of Rome's size consumed in its daily life. Clerks made records. Goods were counted in and counted out. The administrative machinery of supply moved quietly through its ordinary afternoon. Outside, the shadows along the embankment had begun their slow lengthening. The Aventine Hill rose above the Emporium to the north, its slopes covered in apartment buildings and the homes of working Romans, with several temples visible at higher points, temples to Diana, to Juno, to the god Ridiculous, whose story had mostly been forgotten by the people who passed beneath his shrine. The hill held the afternoon light on its eastern face, while the western side dropped into shadow, and the boundary between light and shadow moved slowly down the slope as the sun continued its descent. The way these things always move imperceptibly moment to moment, but visibly changed when an hour has passed. The barges that had unloaded would be readied for the return journey downriver, which was the easy direction. The current did most of the work on the way back to Ostia, and a barge could make good time in the late afternoon on a following current, the crew resting more than working, letting the river carry them. The upriver journey, the loaded one, required more effort, tow ropes, sometimes, and men or animals walking the bank. But that was not the afternoon's concern. The afternoon concerned itself with the lowering of ropes, the movement of goods, the slow swing of the crane. The water lapped against the stone steps in a rhythm that had no particular intention, as water does, pushed by the passing of a barge, by the weight of a rope dropped in, by the small disturbances that accumulate over a long working day and keep the surface from ever quite settling. The light on the river continued its slow change, amber deepening towards something richer. The far bank, the Transtiberum, beginning to take on the quality of objects seen late in the day, when the light makes colors more themselves for a short while before it begins to take them away. The laundries over there, the Philoniki where cloth was washed and cleaned, had mostly finished their work. The streets of the Transtiberum, lower and earthier than the hills of the eastern city, were growing quieter. On the Emporium, the crane turned one more time. The rope creaked in its familiar way. The arm of the crane moved in its long, slow arc. The amphora rose steadily, swayed, came in over the dock, descended with patience toward the hands below. The Tiber moved southward. The afternoon light held a little longer on the water, that warm bronze quality, that slow, continuous shifting of broken light, and then softened, as all afternoon light must eventually soften, into something a little less bright, a little more golden, the long day beginning at last its gentle turn toward evening. The shadows have begun to lengthen across the rooftops now. The afternoon light, which earlier fell so directly and so warmly onto the stone streets of Rome, has started to soften just slightly at its edges. The city does not stop exactly, but something in its rhythm begins to shift. The long business of the day is drawing toward its close, and with that closing comes something else, something that rises from 1,000 doorways and 1,000 small windows all across the city. The smell of cooking, the smell of the evening meal beginning. Romans call this meal the cena. It is the main meal of the day, the one that gathers people together, the one that is prepared with care and eaten slowly, and it comes in the late afternoon or the early evening when the worst of the summer heat has begun to ease just a little. In the hours before it arrives, the city's kitchens grow warm in a different way from the general warmth of the Roman day. It is a more purposeful warmth, a quieter one. In the insulae, the great apartment buildings that house most of the city's population, the cooking happens on small portable braziers. These are simple clay or iron vessels in which charcoal burns low and steady, and on them sit clay pots, earthenware dishes, shallow pans. Most ordinary Romans have no proper kitchen of their own. The rooms are small, the buildings are tall, and open flames in cramped spaces are a danger that everyone understands. And so the brazier does most of the work, tended carefully, not rushed, Lentils are among the most common things that appear in Roman cooking at this hour. They are cheap, they are filling, they are easy to transport and easy to store, and they have been a staple of the Roman diet for a very long time. A handful of lentils, soaked earlier in the day, now sit in a small clay pot above the coals, softening slowly in water. Into that water might go a pinch of cumin, a spice the Romans use with great regularity, imported in dried form and kept in small jars, and perhaps a little olive oil, and sometimes a few dried herbs, whatever the household has to hand. The result is something plain and honest and warm, and it fills the small room with a smell that is earthy and faintly sweet. Flatbreads appear on tables across the city in these hours. Rome has professional bakers, bakeries that have been working since before dawn, producing the round loaves sold throughout the day. But at home, in the insulae, a simpler kind of bread is often made. A flat round of dough cooked directly on the surface of the brazier or pressed against its heated side. It does not take long, and it does not require an oven. And when it comes away from the heat, it is dense and slightly charred at the edges, and very good for tearing and dipping. Vegetables are roasted or boiled, or simply dressed with olive oil and a few drops of garum. Garum is worth pausing over for a moment, because it appears in Roman cooking in a way that nothing quite parallels in later centuries. It is a fermented fish sauce made from small fish, anchovies, mackerel, sardines, layered with salt, and left to liquefy slowly over many months in large vessels. The result is a dark, intensely savory liquid that the Romans use the way others might use salt, not in vast quantities, but as a seasoning, a finishing touch, a deepener of flavor. A few drops over roasted leeks, over cabbage, over a dish of lentils, and something that was simple becomes something more complete. Wine appears on the table in the late afternoon, as it does at most Roman meals, but it is rarely drunk undiluted. The Romans mix their wine with water, sometimes warm, sometimes cool, and they consider drinking wine straight something of a rough habit, not quite civilized. The ratio varies, but a common one might be something like 2 parts water to 1 part wine, producing a drink that is light and slightly pink, and which adds a mild softness to the end of the working day without overwhelming it. Ordinary wine is not fine wine. It is local, rough at the edges, stored in amphorae sealed with pitch, and it tastes of the vessel as much as the grape. But it is part of the meal, and the meal would feel incomplete without it. In wealthier households, the cena is a more elaborate affair. These houses have proper kitchens, real rooms with raised hearths, stone counters, bronze cookware hanging from walls, multiple braziers burning at once. The slaves who work in them have been busy for some time already, because a wealthy Roman dinner does not simply happen. It is prepared in stages, with thought given to the order in which things arrive at the table and the impression they make. A dinner for a well-off household might begin with gustatio, a kind of opening course of eggs, olives, salted fish, and small vegetables dressed with vinegar and oil. After that comes the main course, which might include a roasted bird or fish brought in from the coast that morning, or a stew of meat with pepper and herbs, and perhaps a sweet note of honey or reduced wine, which the Romans called defrutum. Spices come from far away, pepper from India, arriving at Ostia and carried up through the city on the backs of traders and merchants. On wealthy tables, pepper appears with some regularity, a mark of access and means. The kitchen slaves work quietly now. They do not make a great deal of noise. The charcoal beneath the braziers is well established, burning steadily without needing much attention. And the cooks move through their work with the particular economy of people who do this every day, who know the timing of these dishes without having to measure it, who can feel when the sauce has reduced far enough, when the bread has cooked through. The sounds in the kitchen at this hour are the soft sounds of liquid simmering, of something being lifted and set down, of a spoon scraping the bottom of a clay pot. Beyond the kitchen windows and the doorways of the insulae, the sky outside has begun its slow change. The hard, bright blue of the Roman afternoon has deepened just slightly, and the light coming through the gaps between buildings has taken on a warmer tone. Gold is beginning to work its way into the edges of things, into the tops of columns visible from the upper floors of taller buildings, into the surface of puddles in the unpaved alleyways, into the pale stone of the city's walls. This happens slowly. Rome is a city that exists in Mediterranean light, and Mediterranean light at the end of a summer's day does not vanish quickly. It changes through many stages of warmth before it finally fades. People begin to return to their homes. Shopkeepers lower their wooden shutters across their stalls and bolt them from inside. Workers who have spent the afternoon at the emporium or in the warehouses along the Tiber make their way back through the city on familiar routes, past fountains still running, past street corners where small groups of men stand quietly talking. Children who were playing in the street earlier have been called in. Dogs are quieter now than they were at midday. The smell of cooking is everywhere. It moves through the streets on the early evening air, which is just slightly cooler than the afternoon air, though not yet cool by any real measure. The smell of cumin and of olive oil, of charcoal smoke, of bread. These are the smells of a city settling into its evening, a city that has worked through a long summer day and is now preparing to rest. There's something very old about this hour. The Sena has been part of Roman life for centuries, long before Vespasian, long before the great building projects that reshaped the city's skyline, long before the Forum took the shape it has today. In some form or another, people in this city have gathered in the late afternoon to eat together, to share a meal at the end of the day. For as long as there has been anything here that could be called a city, the details change with wealth and time and fashion, but the rhythm of it remains constant. The day's work ends. The fire is lit. Food is prepared. People gather and eat. The sky softens toward gold, and in the quiet kitchens, and on the small braziers of Rome, the evening meal continues to cook, slowly and warmly, as the city draws itself together around the familiar fact of the dinner table. And the long summer afternoon begins at last to release its hold on the day. The sun takes a long time to leave Rome in summer. It does not vanish quickly. It lingers at the edges of things, along the tops of the hills, along the upper cornices of the larger buildings, catching on the pale stone and holding there, warm and amber, while the streets below begin to cool and fill with shadow. The Janiculum Hill, across the river to the west, gathers the last of the light against its slopes, and for a little while, the whole western sky seems to soften into something between gold and the palest rose, and the city below it grows quiet in a particular way, the way a city grows quiet when the day is not quite over, but the night is beginning to be felt. This is the hour of lamps. All across Rome, in every district, in every insula and shop and narrow passageway, small flames begin to appear. The lamps of this city are mostly terracotta, simple and round, shaped on a wheel and fired, with a small wick of twisted flax resting in a narrow spout. The oil is mostly olive oil, pressed and stored in great clay amphorae, and when it burns, it gives off a warm, slightly thick smell that settles into the evening air and mingles with everything else. With the cooling stone, with the last warmth coming off the paving, with the herbs that someone on an upper floor has hung to dry in a window. Some lamps are bronze, finer things owned by wealthier households or better established merchants, with delicate handles and small decorative details, a dolphin perhaps, or a leaf cast into the metal. But most are plain terracotta. They are cheap enough to replace when they break, light enough to carry from room to room, and they burn steadily through the night if the oil is kept full. A household might have a dozen of them, placed on shelves, on windowsills, on small iron stands in the corner of a room. As the light fades from the streets, shopkeepers who have not yet closed their shutters hang a lamp near the front of the stall, and the warm glow falls out onto the street in small pools. A taberna selling wine, a stall where a woman has spent the day selling dried figs and chickpeas from wide, shallow baskets. A fuller's shop, closed now, but for the lamp left burning inside near the entrance, casting a dim orange light across the stone threshold. These small flames do not do much to push back the dark, but they mark the city as inhabited, as present, as still awake. In the better streets, the wider roads near the Forum, the roads that run along the Palatine and the Caelian, the streets the city's magistrates and aediles have thought to equip with public lanterns mounted on stone posts. There is a little more light. Slaves walk these streets with torches when their masters go out to dine. The wealthy travel in litters, carried on the shoulders of strong men, with torches held up around them, and the light moves through the street like something alive, shifting and flickering, throwing enormous shadows onto the walls of the buildings they pass. But most of Rome's streets are not like this. Most of them are narrow and dim by evening, and the people who live in them know to finish their business before the dark comes fully. The streets of the Subura, that long crowded valley between the Esquiline and the Viminal, are filling now with a particular evening atmosphere. The smell of cooking has not quite gone, and through upper windows voices carry, someone laughing, someone calling across a courtyard, someone singing a few lines of something in a low and absent way, the way people sing when they are not really thinking about it. From somewhere deeper in the Subura, not close but not far either, there is music. A water organ, the hydraules, an instrument that uses the pressure of water to push air through its pipes, creating a sound that is rich and slightly strange, unlike anything that comes from strings or breath. Someone is playing it slowly this evening, in long, unhurried phrases, and the sound drifts out into the street and up into the air above the rooftops. It is not a solemn sound, but it is not a hurried one either. It belongs to this hour in a way that seems right, unhurried, warm, faintly uncertain in the gathering dark. Children are being called in from the streets. They have been out since the cooler part of the afternoon, running along the alleys and the wider pavements, playing with wooden hoops and small clay figures, and whatever else has found its way into their hands. The children of Insuli know their buildings intimately, every staircase, every landing, every door that opens onto a courtyard, and they play in these spaces with an ease that comes from having grown up in them. But now, one by one, voices call down from upper windows, firm and warm in equal measure, and the children drift inside, a little reluctant, climbing the stairs with the particular slowness of children who are not quite ready to stop. A dog settles in a doorway. It has been in this doorway since midday, moving only to shift between shade and sun as the day turned. Now the sun is gone, and the doorway is neither warm nor cool, just dim, and the dog rests its chin on the worn stone step and watches the street with half-closed eyes. In the apartments above the streets, the evening has a particular texture. Families eat together or separately, depending on the size of the room and the number of people sharing it. The lamps are lit and placed where they will do the most good, near the table, near the bed, near the shelf, where someone keeps a small terracotta figurine of a household god, a lar, with an offering of a few dried flowers, or a small piece of bread placed before it. These are the private rituals of private rooms, repeated every evening without ceremony. Small acknowledgments of the world beyond the visible one. The air in Rome at this hour carries the smell of lamp oil above everything else. It is not an unpleasant smell. It is warm and faintly earthy, and by the time a person has grown up in this city, it is simply the smell of evening, the smell that means the day's work is done and the night is beginning. On summer evenings, the windows stay open, and the smell drifts out into the streets and rises, and mingles with the smell of the river, which is always present in Rome. The Tiber carrying its particular damp coolness up through the lower districts as the air stills after sunset. The forum is quiet now. The great open space that was full of voices and movement through the morning and the middle of the day has emptied as the afternoon advanced. And by evening, only a few people pass through it. Someone taking a shortcut, a group of men talking quietly as they walk, a slave moving quickly with a basket, going somewhere with purpose. The temples stand at their distances, their columns pale in the failing light, their interiors dark, except for the sanctuary lamps that burn before the statues of the gods, small flames that have burned through the day and will burn through the night and be tended again at dawn. The city does not go entirely silent. Rome at night is never entirely silent. There are sounds that belong to the dark hours, the creak of cart wheels on the stone roads, since wheeled traffic is largely kept from the city's streets during daylight hours and is allowed in only after dark. The carts come in from the countryside and from the port at Ostia loaded with goods, amphorae of wine and oil and grain, timber, marble, all the materials that keep a city of 1,000,000 people alive and building and eating. Their wheels are iron-rimmed and the roads are stone, and the sound carries a long way through the night air, a slow, grinding rhythm that the people of Rome have learned to sleep through. But that is still a little while ahead. For now, in this hour between the last of the daylight and the full dark, the city rests in something that is not quite silence and not quite noise. A water trough at the corner of 2 streets makes its small, constant sound, the overflow running along a channel cut in the stone. The planes of shadow on the buildings shift as a lamp in an upper window is moved. Someone on a rooftop terrace, one of the small terraces built onto the upper floors of the better insulae, sits in the last warmth and watches the sky above the hills, where the stars are beginning to arrive, one at a time, very quietly, as they do on summer evenings, as if they are not in any hurry either. The city breathes out the long heat of the day. The stone pavements, which have been storing warmth since morning, give it back slowly into the night air. The walls do the same. The whole city releases what it has been holding, gradually, gently, the way a long summer day does when it finally begins to let go. The last lamps have been lit now, and the city has grown quieter than it was even an hour ago. The streets, which held so much noise and movement through the long summer day, have settled into something softer. Not silence. Rome is never truly silent, but a gentler register of sound, a lower murmur, the city breathing more slowly now beneath the open sky. The stars are out above the rooflines. In the narrow lanes of the Subura, where the apartment buildings rise 4 and 5 stories on either side, only a thin ribbon of sky is visible overhead, and the stars appear there like distant embers, steady and unhurried. On the wider avenues and in the open spaces near the temples on the Capitoline, the sky opens up into something vast and dark and genuinely beautiful. The way summer skies over warm stone cities can be beautiful in a way that is almost wordless. The air has finally cooled. The stones of the roads, which held the sun's warmth long after evening came, have given it back now into the dark air, and the streets underfoot are cool and smooth and quiet. A person walking barefoot across the Forum, paving stones at this hour, would feel only the pleasant coolness of old travertine, worn almost perfectly flat by generations of feet passing over it in every season. Most of the city is asleep. In the apartment buildings, the insulae that fill the crowded neighborhoods between the great hills, people have been sleeping for some time now. The poorest residents, who worked since before dawn and have to rise again before it, are the deepest in sleep. The rooms are dark, or nearly dark. A single small oil lamp, perhaps burning low on a shelf, casting just enough light to make out the shapes of sleeping forms. The terracotta lamp will burn itself out before morning comes. But the city does not sleep entirely. It never does. And in the darkness, a different Rome comes quietly alive. The vigils are moving through the streets now. These are the men who keep watch through the night, Rome's nocturnal guardians, organized into cohorts that cover different regions of the city, patrolling on foot through the dark hours. They carry torches, and the torchlight moves slowly and steadily through the lanes, a warm orange glow that bobs and shifts as the men walk. They carry water buckets, 2 heavy ones, strapped to poles, because fire is the great anxiety of the Roman night. In a city built so densely, of so much wood and plaster and dry reed matting in the upper floors, fire moves quickly and without mercy. The vigils walk with that awareness always present, checking doorways, noting smells, watching for any thread of smoke rising where it should not be. Their footsteps are steady on the stones. They talk to each other in low voices as they walk, the easy murmured conversation of men doing a familiar task. They have walked these routes many times before. They know which corners are well lit and which are not, which buildings have a landlord who keeps the common areas in order and which do not. They know the night version of Rome the way the vegetable sellers know the morning version. Intimately, practically, as a fact of daily life. A patrol passes near the portico of Octavia, where the columns stand in the torchlight, looking almost the same as they do by day, pale and tall and slightly solemn. The night softens everything. The scale of the city seems different in the dark, the landmarks familiar, but somehow quieter, less insistent. Even the great temples on the Capitoline Hill, which dominate the skyline in daylight, are simply dark shapes against a dark sky now, outlined only where the stars give them any definition at all. Not far from the bakeries near the Tiber, the bakers have been at work since the late evening hours. Bread in Rome is needed early, the city wakes hungry, and the bakeries must have their loaves ready long before the streets fill again. The ovens were stoked hours ago, and the domed interiors are fully hot now, radiating a dry, intense warmth that pushes out into the rooms around them. The bakers work in that warmth without complaint, moving through a familiar routine. Flour, water, the shaping of the dough, with practiced hands that have done this so many thousands of times that the movements have become entirely automatic, almost meditative. The smell of baking bread drifts out through the open doorways of the bakeries and into the street, warm and sweet and slightly yeasty. It is one of the more comforting smells in the world, and it drifts through the dark lanes and up toward the sleeping windows of the apartments above, where someone, half waking, might register it without quite knowing they have, before slipping back down into sleep. The bakers do not mind the night hours particularly. There is something peaceful about working in the dark, in the warmth of the oven, when the rest of the city is quiet. The donkeys that turn the millstones, the circular lava-stone mills attached to many larger bakeries, move slowly in their circuit, and the grinding sound is low and steady, almost rhythmic, almost restful, a kind of bass note underneath everything. Somewhere near the Temple of Saturn, at the western end of the Forum, a small group of men have been walking slowly in the portico for the better part of an hour. They are philosophers, or at least men who think of themselves that way, men with enough leisure and enough education to stay up into the night hours turning ideas over in conversation. This is an old Roman habit, and a Greek habit before that. The portico, with its long covered walkway and its marble floor, is a good place to pace and think. The columns give the walk a rhythm. The cool night air keeps the mind clear. They speak in low voices. The topic drifts. They are discussing stoic arguments about the nature of fate, or perhaps the question of whether virtue is sufficient for happiness. The specifics are less important than the tone, which is quiet and unhurried. 2 or 3 voices passing ideas gently back and forth in the dark, the way water moves over flat stones. Their sandals make a soft sound on the marble. Occasionally, one of them stops to make a point, and the others pause with him, and then they move on again. Above them, the stars continue their slow arc across the sky. Cats are awake in the city at this hour. Rome has always had cats, kept loosely, not owned the way a dog is owned, but present, fed occasionally, tolerated, allowed to move freely through the granaries and storerooms, where they earn their welcome by keeping the mouse and rat populations in some kind of manageable balance. At night, they move with complete confidence through streets they regard as entirely their own, slipping along the bases of walls, sitting absolutely still in doorways for long minutes, disappearing into shadows with an ease that seems almost architectural. A single cart moves slowly along the Via Sacra. Carts and heavy wagons were prohibited from entering the city during daylight hours, Julius Caesar's rule, still in effect. And so the night belongs to the delivery traffic, the slow rumble of iron-rimmed wheels on stone that is one of the characteristic sounds of the Roman night. This cart carries amphoras of oil, each one packed carefully in straw and lashed in place. The ox pulling it moves steadily and without hurry. The carter walks alongside, a torch in hand, the flame bending slightly in the small night wind. They have been delivering through the city for hours already, and they will continue for hours more. The sound of the wheels carries far in the quiet dark. At the Tiber, the river moves on as it always does, dark and steady, catching no light now that the moon has not yet risen. The river smells of itself, earthy and cool, the smell of slow-moving water in summer. The docks are largely still. A few boats are tied up along the embankment, shifting slightly against their moorings as the current moves past them, the ropes creaking very softly, the wooden hulls making small sounds against the dock posts. These are the sounds the river makes when no one is listening for them, particularly. The city breathes. The night deepens. The stars that were overhead when the vigils began their patrol have moved slowly westward now, and new ones have tilted up from the eastern horizon to take their place. This is the deepest part of the Roman night, the hours when even the insomniac philosophers have made their way home, when the bakers are in the quietest part of their work, when the vigils walk their routes in a kind of steady, habitual calm. The stones are cool beneath everything. The air smells faintly of bread and lamp oil and river water, and the particular dusty warm scent that a city built of marble and tuff and terracotta gives off slowly through the night. Rome rests. Not completely. Rome almost never rests completely, but enough. Enough for now. The long summer day has finally, gently, come to its end. The fourth watch has come now, quietly, the way all the deepest hours come. Not announced, not marked by any fanfare, simply present, as though it had always been waiting just beyond the edge of the third watch, patient and still. Rome is sleeping. Not entirely, never entirely, because a city of 1,000,000 souls is never entirely anything all at once. But the great breathing of it has slowed, the way a fire slows when the last of the evening wood has caught and settled and begun its long, gentle decline into coals. The noise that filled every street and alleyway from morning until past dusk has folded itself away into something closer to silence, and the silence that remains is soft and warm and very old. The forum lies empty under the moon. It is a full moon, or very nearly so, and the white stone of the temple steps and the pale dust of the open ground catch that light and hold it, giving it back to the air in a kind of silver glow that asks for nothing and means nothing beyond what it simply is. The columns of the temples stand in that light the way columns have always stood, indifferent, patient, doing the one thing they were made to do. The temple of Saturn, which is very old even in this year of 79 AD, keeps its treasury somewhere in its stone interior, locked and still in the dark. No one walks there now. The rostra, where orators have stood for generations to address the gathered crowds of the Republic and the Empire, is unoccupied. There is no crowd to address. The carved prows of ancient ships, fixed to the platform long ago as trophies, catch a little of the moonlight on their bronze edges. They are very quiet decorations for a quiet platform in a quiet hour. A cat moves across the forum stones. It moves the way cats always move in places where no one is watching, with complete authority, following some route that makes sense only to itself, pausing once to look at something in the shadow near a column base, then moving on. The forum belongs entirely to it for a moment, and then it is gone, slipped into some gap in the stonework, and the forum belongs only to the moonlight again. The Tiber is moving. It is always moving, of course, carrying the brown water down from the hills through the bends of its course toward the sea. In the daytime, the river is busy and crowded, the docks alive with the unloading of grain ships and the voices of workers and the smell of fish and rope and river mud. But now the docks are quiet, the ships moored and still, their reflections broken only slightly by the slow current moving underneath them. The water has been making this journey for longer than the city itself, and it will keep making it for much longer still. And it gives no particular sign of caring about any of it. The hills of Rome are dark against a sky full of stars. The city was built on 7 hills, as people have always said, though the number has always been something of a simplification. The hills are more than 7 if you count certain rises, and the city has grown beyond them in any case, down into the flat ground between, up against the walls, and beyond. But in the dark, from a high place, what you see is this: the city draped over the shapes of the land still visible underneath, the stars above it all, and the whole arrangement so ordinary and so vast that it becomes something like a kind of peace. Most of the lamps are out. The oil in the small terracotta lamps that sit in windows and on shelves and at doorways has run down through the night, and one by one the tiny flames found the end of their supply and went quietly out without drama, simply extinguishing themselves as the night wore on. A few windows still hold a faint glow, a lamp that was filled a little more generously, a household where someone woke and relit their lamp, a vigil kept for reasons the darkness does not need to know. But most of the windows are dark, and most of the people behind those windows are lying in whatever darkness their rooms hold, breathing the slow, regular breath of sleep. In the insulae, the tall apartment buildings that house so many of the city's people, the upper floors are very still. These are the floors of the poorer tenants, those who climbed the most stairs to reach their rooms and paid the least rent for the privilege. They are closest to the stars and farthest from the ground, and now in the deep night, their rooms are simply small dark spaces where people lie on simple beds and sleep the sleep of those who have worked since before sunrise. They will wake before sunrise too, and begin again. The bread ovens are still warm. In the bakeries scattered through the neighborhoods of the city, the fires that were stoked at midnight have done their work through these quiet hours, and the first batches of bread have already been baked and are sitting in their stacks, cooling on the wooden boards. The bakers themselves may have stolen a short rest now, leaning against a wall in the heat of their own workrooms, not quite sleeping, not quite awake, in that comfortable middle place that the body finds sometimes when it is warm, and the work is done for the moment. The smell of bread that has been baking all night is a warm and steady smell, and it drifts a little into the streets, mixing with the cooler air of the deep hour before dawn. The stones of the streets have given up the heat of the day entirely now. All through the afternoon and evening, the stones held their warmth, releasing it slowly back into the air as the temperature dropped. And anyone walking the streets at midnight could still feel a kind of residual warmth rising from the ground underfoot. But in the fourth watch, that warmth is gone, and the stones are cool and smooth, and faintly damp with the condensation that comes in this hour before dawn. They carry the impressions of the day, dust in the crevices, a smear of something near a bakery door, the worn smoothness of the stepping stones that cross the wider streets, worn by 1,000 years of sandaled feet and bare feet, and the hooves of animals and the turning of cartwheels. Somewhere in one of the quieter streets near the Aventine Hill, a door is closed gently, someone going in or going out, being careful not to wake those sleeping nearby. A small, careful sound in the large, quiet dark, then nothing. The street is as still as it was before, and the sound is already gone, already part of all the sounds this day has made, which are themselves already beginning to pass into the past tense that all days eventually occupy. Because this is what the deep night holds, the awareness, even if no one is awake to feel it, that the day is finished. The long summer day that began in gray darkness, with the carts rattling out through the city gates and the first bakers at their fires, has made its full passage. The sunrise came, and the forum filled, and the markets opened, and the baths drew their great crowds through the warm afternoon. People ate and worked and argued and gossiped and attended to all the business of being alive in a large and complicated city. The sun moved over the rooftops, and the shadows shifted, and the evening came, and the dinner parties wound slowly down, and the streets filled and emptied, and the vigils walked their routes, and the night deepened, and here is the end of it, arrived at last, held in the cool stones and the moonlight and the slow river. This was an ordinary day. That is the thing worth resting with here at the end. This was not a famous day. No great battle was announced. No emperor made a speech that would be recorded for centuries. No monument was dedicated. No disaster fell. This was simply a day that happened in Rome in the summer of the 79th year of the Common Era, in the reign of Vespasian, and 1,000,000 people lived it without knowing it would become ancient, without knowing the word ancient would ever apply to anything they were part of. They were simply there, in the warmth of that particular summer, going about the long, ordinary business of their lives. And then the day ended, as days do, and the city settled into exactly this quiet, this moonlight, this river moving without hurry toward the sea, and held itself in the darkness with all the other days that had ended the same way. All the ordinary days now turned by time into something else, something still and far away, and somehow very peaceful. The way all things become peaceful when they have passed entirely beyond the reach of change. The fourth watch is ending. The stars are beginning their slow lean toward dawn. Somewhere very far to the east, the darkness is already not quite as absolute as it was. The city rests, the river moves, and the day, this long summer day, is done.